My father-in-law made a toast about the lake house 6 weeks after he sold it. He looked my husband in the eye, raised his glass, and talked about how excited he was for us to make that place into something special. And I sat there smiling, because I didn't know yet. I found out the next morning at 6 a.m., in 8 minutes of county property records, that the house had been sold to a couple named the Wentworths on December 14th for $387,000. That's where this story starts. My name is Claire. I'm 34. I'm a project manager for a mid-size logistics company. My entire job is making sure things get communicated on time, that nobody gets blindsided, that plans don't fall apart because someone forgot to pick up a phone. I am aware of the irony. I married my husband Daniel 3 years ago. He's 36, an architect, genuinely one of the warmest people I've ever met. He's also the youngest of 3 kids, and he grew up in a family where his parents, Frank and Lorraine, made every major decision and then informed the children afterward. That was just how the Hartley house worked. I didn't fully understand that going in. I do now. Frank is 68. He's the kind of man who talks over you in a conversation and then tells you he's a great listener. Lorraine is 65. She's softer on the surface, but she's the one who actually runs things. She plants ideas in Daniel's head and then acts confused when those ideas cause problems. I watched her do it for the entire 3 years of our marriage. I watched her do it during the 2 years we dated before we got engaged. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt. That was my mistake. Daniel's sister Paula is 40. She's the oldest. She lives 20 minutes from Frank and Lorraine, and she has been their messenger and mouthpiece for as long as I've known the family. Anytime Lorraine has something uncomfortable to say to me, it comes through Paula first. Paula's husband Greg mostly keeps his head down, and honestly, I respect him for that. Daniel's brother Marcus is 38. He lives in Portland, largely checked out of the family drama. He ended up being the one ally I had in all of this. Now, the house. The Hartley family owned a lake house in Delwood, about 90 minutes from where Daniel and I live. It had been in the family for over 20 years. 4 bedrooms, cedar siding, right on the water. Not fancy, but solid. It had a dock. It had a screened porch. It was the kind of property that people in this part of the country would pay serious money for, and Frank and Lorraine knew exactly what it was worth. About 6 months before Daniel and I got engaged, Lorraine sat us both down and told us she and Frank wanted to give us the lake house as a wedding gift. Those were her exact words. She said they weren't using it as much anymore. They wanted it to stay in the family, and they could think of no better way to mark our marriage than to pass it on to us. Daniel cried a little. That house was tied to his entire childhood. I was moved too. It felt like a genuine gesture of acceptance. I had been working hard to fit into this family, and here was Lorraine telling me I was actually part of it. We started talking about the house constantly. Refinishing the dock. Converting the back bedroom into a home office for Daniel. Hosting Thanksgiving there someday. We talked about it the way people talk about something that's actually theirs. 'Cause we believed it was going to be. But before I get to how that fell apart, you need to understand what the years leading up to that moment looked like. Because the house didn't come out of nowhere. It was part of a pattern. The early signs were there from the beginning. At our engagement party, which Frank and Lorraine insisted on hosting even though my parents wanted to, Lorraine gave a toast that was entirely about Daniel. Not about us as a couple. About how much she would miss having him close, how she hoped he wouldn't disappear now that he had a wife. I smiled through the whole thing. Daniel grabbed my hand under the table. Then the wedding. We got married in September 2 years ago. We had agreed, multiple times, explicitly, that the ceremony would be small. 60 people. That was the number we both wanted. In March of that year, 4 months before the wedding, Lorraine called Daniel and told him she had a list of 12 people she needed to add. Old family friends, distant cousins, a former neighbor. Daniel told her no. She cried. He called me. I said the answer was still no. She called back the next day and said she'd narrowed it to 8. He said no again. The week before the wedding, I found out through my maid of honor that Lorraine had already told those people they were invited and had quietly uninvited them after Daniel shut it down. She never told us she'd done that. She just let it sit there. The visits were another thing entirely. In the first year of our marriage, Lorraine showed up at our house uninvited 4 times. I don't mean she called last minute. I mean she drove 90 minutes, knocked on the door, and expected to be let in and fed. The first time, I was working from home on a Friday. She knocked at 11 in the morning. She said she was just passing through. We live on a dead-end street nobody passes through. I let her in, made her lunch, spent 2 hours making conversation, and missed a project deadline that afternoon. That night I told Daniel it could not happen again without warning. He agreed. She did it 3 more times that year. Each time Daniel spoke to her, each time she apologized and said she'd call ahead, each time she didn't. The 4th time it happened, I stayed in my home office with the door closed and let Daniel handle it. I almost didn't hear it through the door, but I did hear it when she said to him, quietly, "She always seems so closed off." I filed that away and didn't say anything. Then there was the incident in March of last year. Daniel and I had just started talking seriously about having kids. We hadn't told anyone. We weren't ready. It was a private conversation between a husband and wife, the way those conversations are supposed to be. Somehow Lorraine knew. My best guess is that Daniel mentioned it to Frank offhand. Frank told Lorraine, and Lorraine did what Lorraine does. She took the information and used it as currency. She called my mother. My mother called me, excited, asking when we were planning to start trying. When I asked how she knew, she said Lorraine had called her to share the happy news that we were thinking about starting a family. There was no happy news. We hadn't decided anything, and Lorraine had called my mother, a woman she'd met 4 times, to gossip about my reproductive plans. I called Daniel from a grocery store parking lot and kept my voice completely flat when I told him what had happened. He said he'd handle it. He called his mom. She said she was just excited and didn't realize it was private. No apology. She said she hoped I wasn't going to make this into a whole thing. Daniel told her clearly that our family planning was not hers to share with anyone, ever. She said fine. 2 days later, she posted on my Facebook page, "Can't wait for the next chapter of your lives," with a baby emoji. I deleted the comment. I went to Daniel and told him that if she did anything like that again, I was going to address it with her myself, and it was not going to be a warm conversation. Okay. Now we're back to the house. The promise was made 18 months before we got married. The wedding came and went. No deed transfer at the wedding. Lorraine said Frank was working with their attorney to handle the title properly afterward. Fine. A month passed. Then 2. Daniel followed up. Frank said the attorney was slow, not to worry. 6 months in, Daniel asked again. Frank said there were tax considerations they were sorting out. We accepted that. At the 1-year mark of our marriage, Daniel sat down with his dad face to face and asked for a status update. Frank said they were almost done with the paperwork. He said it with a straight face. Daniel came home and told me it was almost done. I made a note of it and didn't push. Then came January. A Tuesday night. Frank and Lorraine invited us to dinner at their house. Nice dinner. Lorraine made a roast. Frank opened a good bottle of wine. We talked about Daniel's work, about my recent promotion, about a vacation we were planning. And then at the end of dinner, Frank raised his glass and made a toast about the lake house. He said how happy he was to see Daniel excited about the place, and how he knew we were going to make it into something special. Daniel smiled the whole drive home. He talked about dock repairs the entire way. He was genuinely happy. I was quiet. Something about the way Frank had phrased that toast sat wrong with me. He said we were going to make it into something special. Not that it was ours to do so. He said how happy he was that we were talking about going there. The wording was off. I couldn't explain it clearly enough to say it out loud, so I didn't say anything that night. The next morning, I got up at 6, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled up the county property records. It took 8 minutes. The lake house had been sold 6 weeks earlier, December 14th, to a couple named the Wentworths. Sale price, $387,000. I sat there for a minute. Just sat there. Then I went upstairs and woke Daniel up. I put the laptop on the bed in front of him. I pointed at the screen. I said, "Tell me I'm misreading this." He read it twice. He went completely still. He said that has to be a mistake. It wasn't. I had already triple-checked it. Daniel called his father at 7:15 in the morning. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to Daniel's side of the conversation. There was a long pause after Daniel said what he'd found. Then Frank said, I could hear it clearly through the phone. We were going to tell you. That was the explanation. They were going to tell us. Daniel's voice went flat. He asked why. Frank started talking about property taxes, maintenance costs, how they hadn't been using it, how they'd gotten an offer they couldn't refuse. Daniel asked why they hadn't come to us first, since they'd promised us the house. Frank said the timing was complicated. Daniel asked if they had given that promise any consideration at all, and Frank said, and I am not going to forget this as long as I live. We figured you'd understand. Daniel hung up. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. I let him have a few minutes. Then I said, very calmly, that we needed to sit down together and decide how to handle this before anyone reached out to anyone else. He nodded. We talked for 2 hours. I told him I was not interested in pretending this was a small thing. A promised asset worth close to $400,000 had been sold out from under us without a phone call, while his father was looking him in the face the night before and making toasts. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was a choice. Multiple choices made over weeks, possibly months, to keep us in the dark. Daniel said he needed to go see them in person. We drove out Saturday morning. I went with him. I was not letting him walk into that house alone. The conversation at Frank and Lorraine's kitchen table was one of the most uncomfortable hours of my life. Frank was defensive from the moment we sat down. He talked about capital gains and maintenance fees and their legal right to sell their own property. All of that was true. Nobody disputed it. That wasn't the point. I finally said it directly. I said, you promised this house to us as a wedding gift. You let us believe for 18 months that the paperwork was being handled. 6 weeks ago, you sold it without telling us. I want to understand why. Lorraine looked at her hands. Frank said the situation had evolved. I asked what that meant. He said they had debts, and the house was their asset to address them with. I asked why they hadn't come to us when the financial situation became clear. We could have worked something out. We could have bought it from them at a fair price. Frank said it hadn't seemed practical. Daniel looked his father straight in the eye and asked if he had ever actually intended to give them the house. Frank didn't answer. He looked at the table. Lorraine said, very quietly, we're sorry we didn't handle the communication better. That was the closest thing to an apology we got. I told them this had consequences, that this wasn't something we could brush past. Daniel backed me up. He said he needed time and space before he could have a normal relationship with them again. We drove home mostly in silence. Round 2 started 4 days later when Paula called Daniel. I wasn't on the call, but Daniel told me everything. Paula said their parents were devastated, that Frank hadn't slept, that Lorraine was beside herself over how he had reacted. Paula said we needed to remember their parents were getting older and that money was stressful, and that maybe we should have a little compassion. Daniel told her compassion runs both ways. Then Paula said, Claire is really influencing how you see this situation. Daniel told her that was not something she was allowed to say to him. She said it anyway. She said I had always made him more rigid, that the old Daniel would have let this go. He told her the conversation was over and hung up. He told me all of this at dinner. He said he was tired. He also said he agreed with everything he'd said to Paula and wasn't taking any of it back. 2 days after that, the family group chat lit up. Lorraine sent a message saying she and Frank were heartbroken by the distance and hoped everyone could come together soon. She added a prayer emoji. Paula responded with several lines about family being the most important thing and how she hoped everyone could choose healing. Marcus, from Portland, sent me a private text. It just said, I heard what happened that was wrong of them. I'm sorry. I texted back that it meant a lot. Then Greg, Paula's husband, called me from his own cell phone, low and quick, like he was worried about being overheard. He said Paula was going to keep pushing, that she'd already called Lorraine twice that day to strategize, and he wanted me to be prepared. I thanked him and didn't ask him to do anything. I wasn't going to put him in a bad position. The group chat escalated the following weekend. Paula sent a message saying the family had planned a birthday dinner for Frank's 69th in 3 weeks, and hoped Daniel and I would come. She said it wasn't fair for one disagreement to derail a family milestone. One disagreement. A $387,000 broken promise. A disagreement. I screenshot that message. I screenshot everything from that point forward. Daniel and I talked about the birthday dinner. He didn't want to go. I supported him completely. He sent a message to the group chat saying he needed more time before attending family events, and that he wished his dad a happy birthday, but they wouldn't be there. Lorraine called within minutes. Daniel didn't pick up. She called again. Then from Frank's phone, he didn't pick up that either. She left a 4-minute voicemail. I listened to it with Daniel. She said we were punishing them for a business decision. She said Claire, she used my name specifically, had poisoned Daniel against his own family. She said she hoped I was happy with what I was doing to her son. She was crying by the end. Real crying. I felt bad for about 2 minutes. Then I remembered she had sat across a dinner table from us 6 weeks after selling that house and said nothing. And the sympathy passed. Daniel forwarded the voicemail to Marcus. Marcus called him that night, and they talked for an hour. When Daniel came out of the bedroom, he looked like some weight had come off him. He said Marcus told him he was handling it right. At that point, Daniel and I made some decisions. We were not going to any family events for the foreseeable future, not as punishment, but because neither of us could sit at a table with Frank and Lorraine and perform like everything was fine. We also decided to consult an attorney, not to sue anyone. The house was their legal property, and they had every right to sell it, but we wanted to know what we had. It turned out we had the email Lorraine sent when she first made the offer, sweet and specific. We want the lake house to go to you and Daniel as our wedding gift. We'll handle the transfer after the ceremony. We had text messages between Daniel and Frank, where Frank referred to your house and the transfer. The attorney said a verbal gift promise is very hard to enforce without a written agreement, but that the documentation showed clear intent, and if we wanted to pursue it, we had a case worth exploring. She also said it would be a long, expensive, and emotionally brutal process. We decided not to pursue it legally. Not because we were letting it go, because spending 2 years in court with his parents would cost more than the house was worth in every sense of that word. What we did decide was that we were done absorbing bad behavior without consequences. Frank's birthday dinner happened without us. Paula posted photos to the group chat that night, everyone smiling, and tagged Daniel in it. He looked at it, set his phone down, and went back to the show we were watching. About 2 weeks later, Paula called me directly. She had never done that before. She said she wanted to have a real conversation, woman to woman. She said Frank and Lorraine were in their late 60s, and we didn't know how much time we had with them. She said the house was just a thing, and things weren't worth ruining a family over. I said, Paula, your parents promised us a significant asset, let us believe for 18 months it was being transferred, sold it without telling us, and then sat across a dinner table and toasted to it 6 weeks after the fact. That's not a misunderstanding about a thing. That's a pattern of deception. I'm not keeping Daniel from his parents. Daniel has made his own choices. I'd appreciate it if you'd stop implying otherwise. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, I don't think you've ever really tried to be part of this family. I said, I think we're done here, and I hung up. I called Marcus immediately. He said Paula had been running interference for their parents since they were teenagers, that she genuinely didn't see what she was doing. I told him I wasn't taking it personally. I was documenting it. He laughed, a little sad, and said, good. The next escalation came from Lorraine, and it was the one that made Daniel fully and permanently decide where he stood. It was a Thursday evening in April. He got an email. Not a text, an email, which felt deliberate, written like a formal letter. Several paragraphs. She said she understood we were upset, but that she and Frank had given Daniel so much over the years. Private school, a car when he turned 17, financial help when he started his architecture practice. She listed specific numbers, $40,000 for the car and school fees, $32,000 to help him launch his practice. And then she wrote, I read this email 3 times, so I have it close to exact. We have given far more to this family than one lake house, and we are heartbroken that Claire has convinced you to treat it as a betrayal. There it was. The whole thing in one sentence. Every problem was Claire's fault. Daniel's feelings weren't real feelings. They were my programming. Daniel read the email standing in the kitchen. I watched him read it. He set his phone down on the counter and stood there for about 30 seconds. Then he picked it back up and typed a reply. He showed it to me before he hit send. It said, "Mom, I've read your email. I need you to understand that the way I feel about what happened is my own. Claire didn't put these feelings in me. I'm asking you to stop blaming her for my choices. Until you can do that, I don't think we should be in contact." I asked, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yes," and he sent it. 9 days of silence. Then Frank called. Daniel picked up. Frank said Lorraine was devastated by the email. Daniel said he stood by what he wrote. Frank asked if Daniel was cutting them off. Daniel said he was taking a break from contact until things could be addressed honestly. Frank said Daniel was being controlled. Daniel said he was ending the call. After that, we made our position official. We told Marcus where we stood. He said he supported us and would stay in touch. We removed ourselves from the family group chat. We turned off notifications from Paula's number. We didn't block anyone. We just stopped engaging. Paula sent a final group message, which Marcus forwarded to us, saying she was deeply saddened by what had happened to the family and hoped hearts would soften. Frank sent Daniel one more email that went into the read and archived folder without a response. Lorraine sent me a card in the mail. A physical card. It said she hoped we could find our way back to each other. I put it in the documentation folder. That was 4 months ago. Here is where things stand. Daniel and I are good. I want to be clear about that. This whole thing tested our marriage in a way I didn't expect, because the real question was never about the house. The house was just the moment everything became undeniable. The real question was whether Daniel would keep absorbing what his family did to him and to me, or whether he would decide that the way we were being treated wasn't acceptable. He decided. I didn't decide for him, he decided for himself. And watching him do that was one of the most important things that's happened in our marriage. We took the vacation we'd been talking about, the one Frank toasted at that dinner. We went somewhere different, obviously. We rented a lake house about 2 hours in the opposite direction, nothing to do with the Hartleys. First week of July. We refinished an old canoe that came with the rental. We cooked every meal ourselves. We sat on a dock for 3 days and did nothing. It was the best week we'd had in years. Marcus came to visit last month. Just him, on a long weekend, driving down from Portland. We had him over for dinner twice. He and Daniel talked for hours. At one point, Marcus said quietly that he had known for a long time something like this was coming, that their parents had always operated this way, and nobody had ever really pushed back. He said he felt guilty that he'd been too far away and too checked out to be more useful when it mattered. Daniel told him showing up now was enough. As for Frank and Lorraine, they're out there, living their lives. Paula is still their proxy. I'm sure they have a version of this story, where I'm the villain, and I've made my peace with that. The facts are the facts. The email promising us the house is in a folder on my computer. The county property records are still public. The toast Frank made 6 weeks after the sale happened. None of that changes based on whose feelings are hurt. Daniel is open to reconciliation if his parents can acknowledge what they did without qualifications and without blaming me for his reaction to it. That's the bar. It's not a high bar. It's the minimum. So far, they haven't cleared it. I don't hate Frank and Lorraine. That's the honest answer. I think they're people who have always done whatever was convenient and then expected everyone around them to absorb it and forgive it quickly. I think they've gotten away with it because nobody in that family ever held the line long enough for there to be actual consequences. I think they're genuinely surprised we're not coming around, because everyone always came around before. But we're not coming around, not on this. Not without honesty from them first. The lake house belongs to the Wentworths now. I hope they love it. I hope they fix up the dock and have Thanksgivings there and make it into something great. What that house didn't deserve was to be dangled in front of us for 18 months as a way of keeping Daniel attached and compliant, and then quietly sold the moment it was more financially convenient. That part one will not make peace with. So was I wrong to draw a hard line and refuse to pretend this was fine? I don't think so. But I want to know what you would have done in my position. Because even now, some days I wonder if there was a way to handle it differently. Drop it in the comments.